Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome back to module number 7, lesson 5. And today we're going to be talking about deal structures. So what am I talking about with respect to deal structures? Well, the reality is that you may need to have a different type of structure for different purposes or different opportunities. It all depends on the situation that you find yourself in. So for example, if you're in a seller's market or a buyer's market, that's going to be a very different type of structure that you're going to be using. Or you're going to structure your offer very differently if the property is overvalued. And if you're going to enter into a buy, fix, and refinance type of idea, then you're going to want to structure your deal very differently as well. So it all depends on the situation and or the purpose of what it is you're trying to achieve. All right, so let's take a look at seller's market first. So seller's market is when there's more buyers chasing fewer properties. Therefore, you have a very competitive market and very competitive conditions as well. It's not in your, as a buyer, it's not in your best interest to be buying in a seller's market, but sometimes you'll find yourself in that situation. Now, when you're in that situation, from a buyer's perspective, you need to be able to act very quick. So you want to offer quick and short irrevocable times. In other words, don't give them a lot of time to think about it or counter back. Keep it very tight time frames. You want to create an environment to have the seller want to sell to you. Create some personal rapport. Now the challenge is that in this type of environment, it's going to be very difficult, unless it's a private deal, to be able to develop that personal rapport. So to give yourself a little bit of an edge, this really works well sometimes. It actually worked very well for us recently. There was multiple offers on a single family home that Joanne was representing the buyer, and I suggested that they include a letter as to why they wanted to buy that house. And it was an elderly woman who didn't really need the money. She just needed to get rid of the headache, but she had 4 offers to consider, and she really connected with the story that was attached to this offer from Joanne. So as a result, their offer was accepted for slightly less money as well. We found out later that the family wasn't too happy with Joanne because of this. It was only $5,000 or $10,000, but it was $5,000 or $10,000 that the family weren't going to get in their estate. But it works extremely well. You also want to give the seller what they need. So try and find out why they're really selling, what's the true reasons, and satisfy those needs, such as, do they need to move out quick, or would they be happier if they had a much longer or flexible closing period? So if you can make it known that you are flexible, then that can help give you the edge in the transaction as well. Sometimes providing a larger deposit will tip the scales in your favor as well. And it's true that you only need to put down as little as $1, but we know that nobody in their right mind is going to take you serious if you'd simply put down a $1 deposit. But psychologically, a larger deposit in the mind of the seller means that you're perhaps more serious than the other people. And in the case of having 2 identical offers, if your deposit is larger, then you will most likely win, if for no other reason. Now, you can also provide a deposit with the offer. So most often, when you make an offer, most often what happens is the agent representing you, or if you're representing yourself, you'll put upon acceptance, meaning that once they accept your offer that's finished negotiating, then you will write a deposit check for that property. And there's nothing wrong with that. Strongly suggest that's what you do, because what happens is the moment you write a check and you hand it over to the listing agent, that listing agent has to submit it to the brokerage and deposit it into their trust account in a very short time period. So if the negotiations are going on for any length of time, your initial deposit would be deposited into the bank account, even if you don't have a deal in place yet. And if the deal fails to come to fruition, then it can take you a while to get your deposit back. However, when you're in a very competitive market like this, if you physically attach your deposit check with the offer, then again, this is a psychological thing. It really means nothing more than upon acceptance. But if they can actually see the deposit check, touch it, they give that a little bit more credibility as well. You're going to want to have as few conditions as possible in there, but you're still going to want to have a finance and inspection clause unless financing has already been pre-approved and you're okay with that. But you know, I have seen it where some people would go in with no conditions. That's pretty risky. I don't like that myself. I would never do that for myself. I would never suggest any of my clients do that. But just try and keep the conditions as few as possible. If you're in a competitive market, you may have to pay full price. Well, if you're going to have multiple offers and they're coming in that close to, or you anticipate full price, then what I suggest you do is put in full price plus $1,000. Now, $1,000 is only going to add $4 a month to the mortgage payment, so it's not going to make or break the deal from you being able to afford it. However, that $1,000 can give you that edge. And again, a lot of people will simply put in $100 or $500 above asking price. So again, little things like this can give you the edge. Having flexible terms such as the closing, inclusions, exclusions, just make it very well known to the seller that you can be as flexible as they need you to be. All right, so then we take a look at the buyer's market. Now with the buyer's market, it's the complete opposite of seller's market, which means that there's more properties available for sale than there are buyers looking. So that's good for you as a buyer because the demand is much lower, the inventory is higher, there's going to be fewer offers, less competition, therefore you can usually buy properties at lower prices as well. However, as a buyer, you're still going to need to or be willing to learn what the seller's motivation is and the reason here is you want to be able to satisfy the seller's needs. But you can also leverage this to help you achieve a value closer to your goal. So we talk a little bit about this in negotiations. It also helps keep the seller focusing on why they are selling the property. So if they're selling the property to get rid of the headache, keep mentioning that, accept this offer today and it'll alleviate all of your problems, all your concerns will disappear. Know what the competition is out there. So you want to know what else is available in the market so that you can, don't get hung up looking at just this one property and get emotionally involved. Know what the competition is, so know what your options are. And this way it'll help you remain very logical and practical, keep that emotional, keep the emotions out of the whole transaction. And feed on the scarcity mindset of the seller as well. So this is a perfect opportunity where, again, I'll talk about this more in the negotiating side, but the mindset of scarcity with respect to the seller. If you don't buy their property because there's so many other properties out there and you threaten to take your deal away, then they might even negotiate a better deal for you. All right, be in a position where you can make multiple offers. So here's some options. Make 2 or 3 different offers at close to the actual asking price, but you're going to include many terms, especially terms in your favor, such as vendor take-back financing. The second offer then would be at the true value with usual conditions. So if the property is listed at $400,000, you don't believe it's worth $400,000, you think it's worth maybe $375,000. You might be willing to make a $400,000 offer or $390,000 as long as they give you the terms you're looking for. Then what you do is you determine the true value to be $375,000, so maybe you'll make an offer of close to $360,000, $365,000 with the usual conditions. So now they have 2 options. Then you can also throw in a third option, and this is going to be a deeply discounted for cash, with no or very limited option or conditions in this one as well. So you might throw an offer of $340,000 cash, knowing full well that if they bite at that $340,000, you can take the risk that there's some issues with the property and you can you can resell that property if you need to, or you've got enough equity in there to fix those problems. Also, you need to make sure that you're in a cash position. In other words, you have enough borrowing power through a line of credit and or cash to be able to do a cash offer. Learn what the seller's position is. Consider a low ball offer, but not too low. So a lot of people will try and negotiate their deal initially up front when they're first making the offer. You have to build a relationship, even if it's through realtors. And if you go in with an offer at 90 or 85% of the asking price, what you're going to do is you're going to insult the seller, and they're not going to want to even consider working with you. So what I suggest you do is you go in somewhere around the 95% of the asking price, and you can always negotiate lower afterwards if you need to. Know how to analyze a deal, especially with your bigger deals. Know what is a good deal. Know what the expense to income ratios should be. Don't get caught up in the emotions again. Know what the local cap rate is. So you could be looking at an apartment building that's in a local market around my place here. A little 12-unit building could be $750,000. That same apartment building, you move it into a bigger metropolitan city, and it's going to be worth $1.3 million, simply because the competition, the comparables are selling at a higher rate. Doesn't necessarily mean it makes more money or is worth more, because unless the rents are significantly more. If the rents are significantly more, then yeah, sure, it is going to be worth more. But take a look at what the cap rate is for the local area. So the cap rate in your neighborhood isn't going to necessarily be the cap rate in another city, another location. You need to do your research and find out what the cap rates are. Trust and verify income and expenses. So I've got don't trust. So trust and verify is a very common statement, and absolutely what you want to do is you want to take the information they provide you, and then you verify it. And we're talking about your income and expenses related to that particular property. But in reality, don't trust them, because very, very rarely, probably less than 5% of the deals that I've been involved in, has the information that has been provided been accurate and true. Every other time the information has been inaccurate, usually in favor of the seller, so justifying a higher price as well. Understand the lender's position. So understand how they're going to actually analyze properties. There's no point in you analyzing the property from one perspective. The lender's analyzing the property from a different perspective, coming up with two different valuations if you need to borrow money from the lender to buy that property. Because in the end, it's going to be the lender's analysis of the property that counts. So learn how they analyze their properties and do your analysis similar so you get the same results. Also understand where they would be willing to lend or where they prefer not to lend. Again, they follow the market conditions very closely. For example, up in Fort McMurray in northern Alberta, recently, in the past 3 years, the one lender I tend to deal with a lot, they were pulling back. They didn't want to lend anymore up in that region, simply because they felt that the economy couldn't continue on the way it was, and there was going to be a major correction, and they didn't want to be involved in that major correction. Also understand what the lender's DCR is, and that's debt credit ratio requirements are. It used to be back in the early 2000s, it used to be at 1.1%, meaning that for every $1,000 worth of expenses related to that property, they wanted $1,100 of revenue. They've since increased that to 1.2, so now you need $1,200 worth of income to support $1,000. But again, each lender is going to have different requirements. Now, when you're dealing with an overvalued property, you need to understand how the appraiser is going to look at it. So understand how the appraisals are truly created and why different values for different purposes. What is the risk for the appraiser? So these days, what's happening for appraisers is that if they are a little bit too easy on you, and they allow the higher valuations, so they come in at an evaluation of $850,000 and the bank feels it's probably closer to $800,000, then the bank might say, no, we're not interested in doing that. So if they come in at the 850 and the bank says okay, and then a year later you have to sell the property because you can't meet your payments and the bank has to take it over, and they discover that the true property value is closer to the $800,000, then they're going to go after the appraiser for a false appraisal on that property and sue them. So the appraisers are becoming very, very cautious, and they're being very guarded and conservative on their appraisals as well. So how can you justify the offer? You need to provide some recent comparable sales. So when you're making your offer, maybe what you want to do is take a look around and see what has sold in the past. Provide copies of those sales with your offer as well. You could even provide a copy of the analysis of that property that you did. And the key then is to be patient. Now, when you're looking at buy and refinance deal structures, there's a couple different scenarios here. It depends whether you're working with a realtor or whether you're doing this privately without real estate involved. With a realtor involved, it may prove to be much more difficult to be creative because you're now having to work with somebody in the industry who's not typically creative. They're going to be more cautious and concerned about they're looking for the easy path. They don't like difficult deals. So it's also going to be much more difficult for you to communicate with the seller because now you have to pass all this information through the listing agent as well. Whereas when you're dealing with a private, you're able to build a relationship because you're in contact with the seller. And you can talk about more than just simply buying that property, developing that relationship, and then you can work towards creating a win-win situation. So again, you need to know the financing rules. What are the rules for an open mortgage versus a closed mortgage? When can you actually refinance that property? When you do that, will there be any penalties involved? And when you finance that property, what's the highest amount that you can borrow against it? When you buy, for example, when you buy a residential property with 4 units or less, you can only go to 80% loan to value. When you go to commercial mortgages and you use insured financing, you can go up to 85% loan to value. Yet when you refinance a property in the commercial world, you can only go up to 80%. And in the residential, you can still do the 80% loan to value. What are the fees involved as well? So you need to know all of these items so that you can make logical, informed decisions. Understanding how the appraisal works for you. So what's the current condition appraisal of the property? If you're buying a property that is run down and tired, what does the appraiser determine it to be worth? You need to know what the bank's conservative perspective is going to be of that particular property. What is a private lender going to look at it? And what's the after repair value of that property as well? An appraiser can help you go through that whole process if you're not able to do it yourself. And what you're looking for with the after repair value appraisal is what's the new financing options going to be for you. Now, when you're looking at the buy, fix, and refinance deal structure, it's really important if you have access to cash, lines of credit, vendor takebacks, etc. Because what you want to do is you want to buy the property initially with other people's money, but not the bank's money. Then even if you have to pay a high interest rate for a short term. So for example, one property I bought, I was paying 12% interest. And this is at a time when the interest rates were probably around 4%. But I was paying 12% for the private money in order to buy this property and rehab that property for a period of approximately 14 months. So during that time, the property itself was not cash flow positive, but I didn't have to borrow the money from the bank. So what this does is it allows you to use those creative purchase contracts, or purchase clauses rather. Vendor take-back clauses, cash-back clauses, those types of things are much more easy to take advantage of and use to your advantage when you are not dealing with the banks and or other real estate agents as well. Now, big caution here, you want to make sure you stay away from mortgage fraud, and mortgage fraud includes, but it's not limited to, lying to your lender about your assets, your creditworthiness, your income, etc., or any details with respect to the property. So you always want to provide what they ask for, and you always work with true and realistic values. So if you believe the after repair value is going to be $400,000, don't try and structure a deal that says it's worth $500,000. That's mortgage fraud. Don't place your lawyer in a situation where they have to lie for you or expect them to lie for you. When you're dealing with your lawyer and you're putting a mortgage on the property from a bank or a lender, then more often than not, the lawyer is going to be representing the lender in the transaction as well. So they're representing the lender with respect to the mortgage. Anything you say or do regarding that mortgage, they are required by law to pass that on to their client, the lender. So if, for example, you express to your lawyer that you are planning on doing a second mortgage on this property within a month afterwards, then the lawyer is going to be required to pass that information on to the lender as well. And then the lender may say, no, I don't want to do that. So just be careful what you say to your lawyer. You also want to avoid the Oklahoma. And what the Oklahoma is where back in the day, it used to be that an investor, a banker, and an appraiser and a lawyer, they'd all get together, maybe not the banker so much, but they would get together and they would artificially inflate the value of the property. So the appraiser would come out and look at a property that is worth $300,000 in the open market, but create an appraisal saying it's worth $400,000. You take that appraisal to the bank and say, here's the property I own, here's the appraisal. I'd like to borrow 80% of $400,000. Well, you're now borrowing more money than what the property is actually worth, and that's what they call in Oklahoma. That is definitely mortgage fraud. All right, so here's an example. Here we have an after repair market value on a property of $400,000. The estimated work required is only $25,000 to bring it up to that market value. Their asking price is $360,000. You've negotiated and you've come to terms with a price of $325,000. So now you create your purchase and sale agreement. What you're going to do is put the price in at $375,000 with a cash back of $50,000. So by doing that, the seller still gets their $325,000. Financed with a line of credit or a vendor take-back or a combination of that up to the $325,000. Now, what happens here is the transaction is going to be registered as a sale for $375,000, even though you only paid $325,000. And it's very important for you to have this registered value, inflated value, as long as it's not higher than the aftermarket value, after repair value. It needs to be realistic. So you've now got it registered as a $375,000 sale. And the idea is that in 3, 4, 6 months, whatever the time period is, you're going to go to the bank and you're going to finance it based upon the after repair value of $400,000. The bank's going to take a look at it. They're going to send the appraiser out. And part of the appraisal is going to see what you paid for it. So they're going to see that you paid $375,000 for it. They're not going to see that you truly paid $325,000. They're going to see the registered value of $375,000. Then you're going to show them that you spent $25,000, so it's easily worth the $400,000. So the bank's going to say that's fine, not a problem. Now the question is that mortgage fraud? I say it's not mortgage fraud because what we're doing is, well, first of all, we're not lying to the bank. Nowhere have we lied to the bank. We've also kept the value under the $400,000. So no, this is not mortgage fraud. Now, as I say, if we had put the price in at $425,000 with a $100,000 cash back, then yes, this would technically be considered the Oklahoma or the mortgage fraud. So you need to understand that as well. Now, here's a real deal. It's a 12-unit building in Saskatchewan, and I don't believe it's any longer for sale, but it was for sale. The current rental income at the time that it was for sale was $103,000. The expense ratio was 28% of the income, which is, in my opinion, about $15,000 lower than what it actually should have been. The market value based upon the existing rents and was anywhere between $750,000 and $950,000. It sort of depends upon the expenses that we're missing as well. The potential rental income is $155,000. That's almost 50% more than what the current rents are. Therefore, what they were doing was asking for $1.5 million for this property based upon the potential rental income. Yet, even with the potential rental income, the true potential value was 1.3 because they were still missing a lot of the actual expenses related to that property. So when I say you need to understand how to evaluate a property, this is what I'm talking about here. You need to know what the property is truly worth so you don't get caught up in buying an overvalued property. So continue on. In reality, with this particular property, what you're simply going to want to do is just sit back and watch and see what happens with that property. Go back, 9 months to a year later, and approach the seller with your analysis of the property, showing them what it's truly worth, and make an offer based upon those real numbers. If there's no interest, that's fine. Just say, not a problem. Wait a couple more months and repeat the same offer, perhaps even with a second offer, which is closer to the potential value. But there has to be a large vendor take-back attached to this so that they've got some skin in the game as well. And what you can do is you can tie your interest payments to the performance of the property. Keep in mind that no lender in their right mind is going to lend based upon the potential value. They always look at what the current rents are, especially in, where I live, we have rent control. Now, I know not every province or state has rent controls, which is good for you if you don't. However, if you are buying in a market that does have rent controls, when you buy a property, you are actually taking on the existing rents, and your hands are going to be tied with respect to those rents until the tenants leave, vacate the property. And it's not easy to get them to leave. All right, so continue on here. If, for example, they were willing to take your offer with a vendor take back for $400,000, you could say it's at 0% interest with no payments for 1 year, or until the gross income is increased up to X amount of dollars. So if they want to, in other words, if they want to sell it based upon the potential revenues that it generates, then they need to be prepared to work with you in order to make it work. And then once you reach a certain value in payments, will begin based upon a 30-year amortization, 0% interest, until the gross income is increased up to Y. Again, you can play with these numbers to work out whatever way you want. But obviously it has to be in your favor to make it work for you. If they're not willing to do that, then anybody who does buy that is one of two things. They're either buying knowing that they're paying too much for a property and they don't expect any positive cash flow, and they're just simply buying it for appreciation because they believe the market's going to go up over time, or they don't understand how to analyze a property. And unfortunately, I believe that's more often the case than not. People get in there, they believe what the listing agent has put on paper or what the seller has put on paper. They buy the property. A year later, they discover that they're not making any money. They now see what the real numbers are, and they become a desperate seller trying to sell that property for as much as what they bought it for in the first place. And the cycle continues. So, in all likelihood, the seller of this particular property is simply fishing. They're throwing it out there. They don't really need or want to sell it. But if somebody comes along and buys it for $1.5 million, well, they'd be crazy not to sell it. And that's a lot of the listings that are out there as well. Now, I can't blame them. If I was the seller in that position and somebody wants to buy my property that's worth only $1 million, but they're willing to give me 1.5, not a problem. I'll sell it any day. And that's what a lot of the sellers are doing. And unfortunately, in the commercial, in the apartment building especially, We're in a seller's market where there's many buyers looking for good deals out there, but there's so few good deals available. So in the apartment building market, we're definitely in a seller's market. In the single family home market right now, we're pretty close. I would say in most areas, we're in what we call a balanced market. And in some regions, we are in a, some regions are more currently in a situation in economic downturn. So we're in a buyer's market in some areas as well. And again, you just need to be aware of what the market conditions are, where you're buying and investing, and understand the rules, the regulations, so you stay within those rules and regulations, and make your offers to get your first deal or your next deal. So that's it for this lesson. Again, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them at kbeaton@arcarealestate.ca, or listen to the webinar, which will follow this course as well.